In this segment, we are going to use uh, a function, exist function. So the exist function takes a parameter as a query. Okay, so exist function takes a parameter, um, a query. Okay, now the exist function can check whether the result of a query is empty or not. Okay, so we can use the exist function to check whether a query, given a query, has any tuples or not. So the exist function will take a query. It will evaluates to true if the result of query has one or more tuples. Okay, so if the result of query has one or more tuples, then it will evaluate to true. But if the query doesn't have any result, all right, then it will, so if it gives a null set, all right, it will evaluate to false. So the exist function will check, simply the exist function will check whether the result of a query is empty or not. So let's see an example. We are going to use exist function specifically for a correlated nested query, and we can use exist function in a where clause as a condition. All right, so finally the exist function is going to be evaluated to either true or false. So let's see one example. We're going to retrieve the name of employees who are department managers and have at least one dependent. So what actually we're going to check, for each employee we are going to check whether that employee is a department manager, okay, and that employee has at least one dependent. Okay, so here one thing we have to actually look at in the query, at least one dependent. How we can see whether a employee has at least one dependent? What we can do actually, for each employee we can run a query and we can look at the dependent table. Okay, for each query we can run another query to look at the dependent table, whether the dependent table has at least one record with the same SSN of the employee. All right, okay, so that means that employee has at least one dependent from the dependent table. Okay, and how we can do that? We can use the exist function. Okay, inside the exist function we can run another query. All right, so another query which will find whether the given employee has an dependent record in the dependent table. Okay, so if the query has at least one record, that exist function will be true. So this query is also asking who are department managers. Okay, for the same employee we can look at the so for the same table we can look at the department table whether the same employee has a record who has a match with the manager SSN attribute value. Okay, so how we are going to write the correlated nested query? We're going to find the F name and L name from the employee table. So we're going to see whether there exists a dependent from the dependent table, whether the m.ssn, this m is coming from the employee table, equals to ESSN, this ESSN coming from the dependent table. Okay, so how this will work for each employee? So for each employee this will find, okay, this will check all the dependent record whether there is a dependent with the same SSN. Okay, same SSN from the employee table. Okay, so if it finds that it has a dependent, that exist function will return true. All right, now we have to find out whether this employee is also a department manager, and how we can do that? We can run a AND operation and we can have another exist function. This is going to check whether the dependent table, whether in the dependent table there is a m.ssn, m is from employee table, okay, is same as the manager ssn table. So for the same employee, this will check all the department table, okay, all the department table, while the manager ssn is same as the ssn of the employee, okay. So finally this will give us the specific employee who has a dependent in the dependent table and who is a manager in the from the department table, okay, who has a record same as a manager ssn record from the department table. Now the exist function will return true if the queue has at least one result, okay. Now if the queue has no result, means if the queue returns a null set, that will return false, okay. Now so the exist function returns false if the result of query is a null set. All right, means the query doesn't return any tuple. Now we can use a not exist function. The not exist function will return true if the query returns no result, okay. So the not exist function is going to return true if the query doesn't return any result. All right, so if the query doesn't return any result, in that case the not exist function will return true, okay. If the query returns at least one result, in that case the not exist function will return false. So in some cases we may have to use the not exist function. So let's see one example. We want to retrieve the name of employees who have no dependents. All right, so we want to retrieve the name of employees who doesn't have any dependents. All right, how we can find that? So what we can do, for each employee we are going to check that in the dependent table whether this employee has any dependent, okay. If we find that the employee doesn't have any dependent, in that case the query is we are going to run in the correlated nested query is going to return a null set, okay. The query is going to return null result, okay, no values. So that means the not exist function with that employee will return true. So in that case we are going to use not exist function. So the query will look like, so select the attribute name from employee where not exist, select star from dependent D where e.ssn, e from employee table equals to d.essn, d. from dependent table. So for a specific employee, if the employee doesn't have any dependent in the dependent table, so in that case for a specific employee this query is going to return a null result, okay, null set, and the not exist function will be evaluated to true for that employee, okay. So in that case this employee will be selected as a employee who doesn't have any dependent, okay. So to retrieve such result, okay, we have to use not exist function. All right, so in some of the query we can use some literal set in SQL. So this is simple. For example, we want to retrieve the social security numbers of all employee who work on project number 1, 2 or 3. So in that case we can simply use a in operator with a explicit set, okay. Explicit set means with a set of explicit value. So PNO in 1, 2, 3 means this is going to find the SSN number from works on table where PNO in 1, 2, 3. So if the PNO is any one of this value, this is going to return true, Okay, so this is going to return that ESSN value from the works on table.